We are in the book of John, and we are looking at chapter 8 today. It is a great chapter. If ever you want to speak about the identity of Jesus Christ, his own claims to divinity, his relationship to the Father, and so on. It talks about where he comes from, where he's going, who sent him, what's his mission here, and just who are you is a question that comes out at some point. So here again we are part of the chapter 7. Really, we are still in the same scene, and the Pharisees are asking Jesus questions. Now this is a lengthy passage, and there's much to be said, but I think a sort of a bird's eye view will give us a good enough understanding of the conversation and the content of the conversation, but there is a lot that I'm leaving on the table, nuances and things that we are not going to look at today. It is a rather detailed passage, and it can take a long time. The first block that I've chosen is from verse 12 up until verse 20. The reason I've blocked it is, well, I'll tell you in a minute why I've blocked it, but part of the discussion here is where Jesus is making a statement, and for the rest of that block he is almost like he's in a courtroom and he has to defend himself. He makes this claim, I am the light of the world. Whoever follows me will never walk in darkness, but will have the light of life. Now, that is a sermon on its own. But it's a bold statement. And here the Pharisees are starting to question his witness. He says, well, that's great. You have your own testimony, but that's not in their court, in their law system. You have to have two witnesses. You can't just say, you can't just be your own witness. All the language here, up until verse 20, is courtroom language. They have to testify. It says, my testimony is valid because I know where I'm from and I know where I'm going, and therefore you must judge by human standards. I judge no one. All of these are courtroom language. I stand with the Father, the one who sent me. And this is his second witness. He calls on the Father to stand with him and to witness. He talks about the law, the testimony of two witnesses. So all of this is courtroom language. Again, he calls on the Father to be his witness. And then they ask the crucial question, who is your Father? And we'll get to that in a minute. So I've blocked this, and I said that this block tells us about the statement that Jesus is making, I am the light of the world. And if we understand him correctly, he is not the only one. His testimony is valid. He's not the only one that testifies in favor of this statement. His heavenly Father also does. And therefore he is defending his statement almost in a court of law. The very important part that he is talking about is he's calling upon his Father. And here he brings his Father back into the discussion. And then there's the obvious question, where is your Father? And this leads then to verse 21 to 24, where he says, he answers the question as to where. And then he also starts talking about a place where he's going. Where is your Father? And then he says, once more, Jesus said, I am going away. Where are you going? Well, where I'm going, you cannot go. And you cannot come there. And then he says, but exactly where is this? He says, I am from above. That above is usually referred to in the Jewish culture as the heavenly realms. and you are of this world or below does not mean here, hell or death or anything. It's a contrast to what is above, which is heavenly. Below simply means earthly. You are here from earth. And then he repeats that in a different way, and he says, you are of this world, but I am not of this world. So Jesus is answering the question, where? Where is your Father? And then he says, well, my Father is where I am going and where I've come from. So that, to me, looks very much like, because Jesus knows who his Father is, his very first claim to divinity. You can't just say, I am from above, without meaning you are also a heavenly creature, at least. And the second part of the claim to divinity is this phrase, and you will look for me, the Messiah, and you won't find me, and you will die in your sin. The only person who can forgive sins is God himself. And the Messiah is the one they're looking for, who will be able to free them from their slavery of sin. And Jesus is saying, listen, where I go, you can't go, because that's heavenly. And since I am from heaven, you will look for me as the Messiah, and you will die in your sin because you haven't found me. You don't acknowledge my true identity as someone who is divine. So that's a massive statement where he says he is divine because he can forgive sins. Again, he repeats it in verse 24, if you do not believe that I am he, the Messiah, you will indeed die in your sin. That is really a claim to be able to do something that only God can do, and that is to forgive sins. Then they change the question, not where is your Father, but if you claim to be able to forgive sins, then the natural question for them would be, who do you think you are? Who are you? And he answers that very particular question. Again, it talks about his identity. And what he's saying is, he is the sent one. Again, for me, a claim to divinity, because it depends on who is sending you. But he says he is the sent one. Verse 26, I have much to say in your judgment, but he who sent me is trustworthy. Also up in verse 28, when you have lifted up the Son of Man, and that is who he is. Verse 29, the one who sent me has not left me alone, for I always do what pleases him. I am the sent one. I am the Son of Man who is sent. To do what? Well, in verse 28, to be lifted up. And the Son of Man, of course, is his famous claim, or his famous name for himself, taken from Daniel chapter 7, which is a claim to divinity. Also in verse 28, he says, I do nothing but speak, just as the Father did. So I'm the sent one who will be lifted up, and I'm the sent one who will speak what the Father is saying that I should do. This is who I am. I am the sent one. Then we move on to verse 30 up until verse 36. Here, the question, the conversation moves forward, and they're asking him, how do we know that we can believe in you? The word believe and truth is brought in to the discussion. And what the truth, Jesus is linking the truth to, is freedom. In verse 32, then you will know the truth, and the truth will set you free. the very famous sentence. But it's very important in a context not to quote that out of context into any kind of freedom. It is a very, very particular freedom that Jesus has in mind. He says that the Jews are slaves. They say they're not slaves. We've never been slaves. How can you say that we need to be set free? And then Jesus qualifies it very explicitly in verse 34. Jesus says, very truly I tell you, everyone who sins is a slave to sin. And it's the slave to sin and sinfulness that is the primary, the fundamental slavery that Jesus has come to break people free from. Verse 36 repeats it. So if the Son sets you free from that slavery of sin, then you will be free indeed. Even if the Romans are lording it over you, even if you are behind bars, it doesn't matter. But if you are set free by the Son from your sin, then you will be free indeed. So the summary of verse 30 to 36, I think, is what Jesus has come to achieve. He has come to achieve the freedom from sin. And again, that is only something God can do. So the claim to divinity, again, is very strong. The next block runs from verse 37 right down to verse 47. Here, it's a very detailed discussion. Again, I'm not going to go into all of the nuances of the discussion, but what Jesus and they are talking about is, who is your actual father? What is your lineage? And Jesus is refuting a crucial element of their theology, really. They think that Abraham is their father, which in a human sense it obviously is. But he's saying in a spiritual sense, Abraham is not their father, but the devil is. So again, he is speaking about his father, someone who he has seen. He was in the presence of that father, and in hindsight, John, who wrote this gospel, knows that that is God the Father. And there's no way that you can be in his presence and survive if you are not fully God yourself. Then you contrast that. They claim to say that Abraham is their father. Of course, that's an earthly representative, but Jesus says, I am speaking spiritually. Spiritually, what you're doing in denying my identity and wanting to kill me and you don't believe me, that shows your true spiritual father. Abraham might be your human father lineage, but your spiritual father is the devil. Verse 8, or chapter 8, verse 44. He also says that in verse 47. The reason you do not hear is that you do not belong to God. They thought that they belonged to God simply through their lineage and their ancestry to Abraham. And Jesus says, no, my Father is the Heavenly Father, the one you call God. Your spiritual father is actually Satan. So things are getting really hot in terms of this conversation. The last section is verse 48 to 59. And here, again, they ask Jesus, who are you? It's a real question. It's a burning point here about Jesus' identity. Now it's been driving, they are driving it to the edge. Because now, for the first time, they say, in response to him calling their father Satan, they say this in verse 48. The Jews answered him, aren't you saying that, aren't we right in saying that you are a Samaritan? This is who you are. You're a human being, right? You're not the sent one. You can't forgive sins. Your claims to divinity is nonsensical, and it's more than nonsensical. It is demon possessed. So here they turn they turn the argument against Jesus. Verse 52, they repeat it. Now we know, now that you've said that whoever obeys my word will never see death. That is a massive claim, which they understood not as spiritual, but as physical death. So now they know. Now they say, no, I know exactly who you are, Jesus. You are most certainly demon possessed. And that is a very serious claim. In contrast to that, the most famous claim to divinity that Jesus makes in, I think, most of the book of John is in verse 58. The very famous, very truly I tell you, before Abraham was born, I am. There are numerous references in Exodus 13 and Exodus 3, Isaiah 43, Isaiah 41, Isaiah 44, that speaks of God of the Old Testament, Yahweh, in these terms. And Jesus uses that word, I am, in a sense that these Pharisees will understand. Of course, he could have said, before Abraham was born, I was, but he chooses to use the word I am, ego eimi, in this sense, in this way, so that it echoes the Old Testament phrase where God says, I am. And he claims to be God himself. Jesus Christ can only forgive sins. He can only be the light of the world. He can only set you truly free if he is God. So here we have Jesus Christ not saying, I am like God. He's saying, I am Yahweh. And that's why they pick up stones to kill him. That is the punishment for blasphemy from Leviticus 24. May we reflect in all earnestness about Jesus' identity. May we bow before him as fully God, the second person of the Trinity that gave us the gift of light and life and freedom.